Hi, I'm Philip Bither, Curator for Performing Arts here at the Walker Arts Center. And with me is Bill Morrison, who's created a brand new work with composer, trumpeter Dave Douglas called Spark of Being, which we'll get to see tonight here at the Walker Arts Center. It will be the third performance of the work. The Walker helped co-commission the piece along with Stanford Lively Arts at Stanford University, which hosted the premiere last April, 2010. And so, Bill, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah. It's as we've done a couple of projects together, and big fans of your work, and so interested to hear how you came together to make this project with Dave Douglas. And the first question is really, what were the origins? I know you've said in public you've long wanted to look at Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein and maybe make a film related to that story.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a collector of archival films and found footage filmmaker to a greater or lesser degree. And with Frankenstein, there was this opportunity to sort of merge the text and the form. And I had, of course, read it in high school or whatever, and reread it with an eye to do this, maybe a decade ago even. And I sort of had kept a box of, of films underneath my bed that I think had the label "Work in Progress." Gods of Time, and I would find things that would go into Gods of Time.
And what did that mean, Gods of Time?
Just that it was any collection of things where there was filmmakers at work, or there was, was sort of self-reflexive about filmmaking, where it could also be interpreted sort of more metaphysically. That, that there was a great keeper of the stars moving,
puppet master somewhere.
And a couple of those shots ended up in Decasia, and but it always seemed like there was somehow a Frankenstein underpinning to that, and the more and more Dave and I talked about the relationship between art and technology. I think in the middle of one conversation we had, it just occurred to me that maybe this would be the project to bring this out. And we needed an organizing principle at that point. So
rather than just making abstract images set to
we had several different working titles for our project: The History of Gadgetry, and I think we were really driving the people at Stanford kind of nuts because we kept changing the title, and then in each description became even more.
I got
vague.
Regular updates, and it was interesting folling it.
But I think once we were able to say Frankenstein, everybody said, "Great, we understand that. We can market that or write a blurb for it, and you guys figure out what you're going to do. But at least our bases are covered." So, which is a great relief, when you're making to have a title. And
right.
And also, Dave is tenacious, and when he knows the direction he's going, he goes deep.
Right.
So then immediately I just started getting emails about Frankenstein, and comics about Frankenstein, and books that he'd read about Frankenstein, and that was great.
Now, is the Gods of Time box you had under your bed or wherever you kept it one of many boxes? Is that part of your process, that as you research and find archival films, and that you will kind of keep a number of different projects for the future down the road and separate things, and at some point figure you'll make something on this? Or
I think the Gods of Time box was unique in that it was a vestige of physical analog film rolled on cores that I had accumulated over the years, and
unlike these days, is it mostly digital material?
Yeah. What I'm doing with my relationship with an archive now typically is that I'll go in, get access to a piece. I can't keep a nitrate film in my studio. I'm not insured or licensed for that, so it would necessarily have to go to a lab anyway. So I've worked out, certainly through the Library of Congress, and a system where we send a roll or a bunch of rolls to a lab, and then I'll send the lab a drive, and they'll make an HD copy for me. So
okay.
yeah, I have now. I guess in the digital era, I have bins of projects that are ongoing, and they go or drives that are certain projects, and yeah, they're always coalescing and cross-pollinating, and then eventually I'll find a project and I go, oh well, that's where that will go. I guess an example of that, I did there was David Lang, the composer.
Sure.
I ran into him on Green Street just by chance one day, and he said, oh, I'm doing this DVD, and there's a song that I'd really like you to work on. And so he gave it to me, and it was just like sort of one chord song, How to Pray, and made it in 11 minutes, and maybe there's a little extension in the ninth minute, but it always sounded to me like you were rocking on the sea somehow. And I started collecting iceberg footage, which actually we see in the Spark of Being, for, I don't know, probably for a Titanic project that we worked on, Gavin Breyer's Titanic. And then I thought, well, this would be perfect for How to Pray. So it's maybe the same iceberg shots shown up in How to Pray, Spark of Being, and Sinking the Titanic, but there's to more or less degrees. There'll be maybe just a cutaway, or there'll be an 11-minute rhapsody of icebergs or something. So it's different things find different places that way.
In your going way back when you started as a filmmaker, when did you come upon the idea of primarily using found footage or distressed material, going into archives and old films, and then putting something new together from it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I started as a painter, and I was interested in animation and sort of breaking open the black box of cinema, so that I could make a painterly film or somehow disrupt the 24 frames per second, and so that you were sort of aware that you were seeing individual frames go by. And so I did a lot of distressing things myself, or and
distressing the film yourself in various ways,
and optically printing, and I guess maybe out of economics I started looking for material that was copyright free and was older, and Ken Jacobs wrote a really interesting program note for Tom Tom the Piper's Son, which is based on a paper print film of the same title. So I started getting interested in the paper print collection and going down to the Library of Congress and ordering those, and then sort of exploring, what does that mean to be taking old films and rephotographing them and giving them new audiences, and so that's sort of the root of the Frankenstein project too, is that you're taking maybe corpses or discarded pieces or things that have been buried for many years and unearthing them and recombining them and giving them a new life. So I've seen that, as my role, as an artist for a while, and I guess the distress or the sort of the fetishistic attraction to the degrading thing comes from that, in that you're seeing the physicality of the film, and that it is a living thing, and it's a thing that can be touched. That it doesn't just roll through a camera then roll through a projector, and it's part of the plastic world, and
so that people will see both the will be cognizant of what the material is that they're witnessing, as well as the content hidden within it.
Exactly. I mean, I think in most movies we're sucked into a world, and we don't want to be reminded that world is...
Until the film breaks, or in the old days, or something.
But I guess it was also Peter Delpit's Lyrical Nitrate, which Zeitgeist released maybe in 91 or 92. I saw that at Film Forum, and I was really taken with the decay there, and I think there was there was a scene where Adam and Eve is the closing sequence, and Eve gave Adam an apple, and then all hell broke loose. The nitrates was decaying at that moment, and I was just like, wow, it was a eureka moment for me. So
Is that when the moment you thought, I'd like to explore that as a whole technique? Or as a style,
exactly. And maybe that was my creation moment. So, and I've been, then, that was a while ago now. That was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I made a film called The Film of Her, which sort of explored the genesis of the paper print collections, and with a sort of a fictional fantasy spin on it. And it's 12-minute short. And I also that explored the guy who discovered that there was all these rolls of paper, that contained films that couldn't be projected in the Library of Congress, and also the guy who went to the trouble of rephotographing them. So I felt sort of a kinship to both personalities. And I was asked to show that film at a conference in South Carolina, the Orphan Film Symposium, maybe '99, and I knew that they had the Fox Movie Tone outtakes, which are all shot on nitrate, and so I went in there during the conference and typed, emulsion deterioration into their search catalog, and like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of titles. So
really?
Typed severe emulsion deterioration, and we got it down to like 150 or something like that, and saw some pretty remarkable shots that became Decasia. And
okay.
Maybe.
And they gave you the rights right away?
There was a process,
right.
But they were certainly very reasonable, and to this day I continue to use them a lot. A lot of their work is represented in Spark of Being.
Was that around? I mean, was it around that time, that first one of those early films in the early to mid '90s, that you then considered yourself, or you realized you were moving into the realm of being an experimental filmmaker?
Yeah, I think I made a film called Footprints in 1992, and it was part of a Ridge project.
Oh,
and,
okay.
Or pieces of it came from a Ridge project, from an evening-long multimedia theatrical piece, and then I edited it down into a 6-minute film and sent it off to a film festival, and it got in, and then I was like, oh, okay, I could do this.
Right. So. Had you been influenced prior to that by some of the vanguard American experimental filmmakers?
My professor in art school at Cooper Union was Robert Breer, the great animator.
Oh, really?
And he was also just a great role model for me, because I was somewhat intimidated by the New York art scene, which was really hot at the time, the painting scene, and he was so down to earth and incredibly funny and self-deprecating, and that was like, okay, I could see how I could be an artist.
Right, and that perhaps being a filmmaker held a certain appeal that being a painter didn't. Was that?
I mean, I guess just in terms of viewership, if you look at a painting for a minute, that's a long time to look at a painting. You know? And that's got to be a good painting to look at for a full minute. And so I quickly realized that I could control how long people were looking at my work.
Provided we have them in the seats.
We have them in the seats, and this is the music and the audio. So, and it is a very different head.
Right. So. Do you back on the creation of Spark of Being? You had talked about, in some ways it's a parallel, and the way you make films, and even in some ways the way Dave draws from sampled sounds and things like that is a similar process of the way perhaps Dr. Frankenstein constructed a new being out of these discarded parts. Is there a corollary cautionary component to your work that, his creation there was a downside to all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you see that in your work in any way? Is there lines that you have to take care with not to cross?
Well, certainly you have to let your piece go once you've made it, and that's part of like being here tonight.
Right.
You sort of seeing this thing take off on its own, and maybe Dave feels like in some ways he's handcuffed because he can't improvise outside the boundaries that are now set
because he's got
film.
Timing cues that they've got to hit with themes and things like that.
Yeah. Right? So in a way that's a caution, because now it's ruling him as a creator. And I guess there would be a way to VJ or free mix of video, but it doesn't interest me. So, I guess with any piece that you let out there there's the danger of somebody saying, okay, well, that's who you are. I'll put you in this box and say,
Right.
You're recognizable because of these attributes. So you're just,
right.
I think that's with any time you make something.
Yeah. You'd mentioned in your notes in the program that there's also this line or this question about when is reuse of material transformative and when is it simply derivative?
Yeah.
And how do you, as an artist, navigate those?
Yeah. Moments? One thing is the legality of the use, I guess. Which I think we pursue clearing shots and then also. The intention of when they were originally used. I mean, a lot of this stuff was educational films or stock footage, or in the case of the newsreels, just outtakes. That, maybe a bit of it, or like 2 seconds, would be edited into something that would play before a feature in the 20s. And but these cameramen were out there with 35 millimeter black and white negative, and they were just gunning, they were shooting incredible rolls of negative in amazing places. And also I think cinema was new then, and there was a fascination with what they were doing. And so I think, getting back to your question, that the intention of how the stuff was originally shot and what it was for is so radically different than how it's being repurposed.
Right.
In that way, it's transformed. Now, I'd feel differently if I'd taken somebody else's pre-edited material and was using their either artistically or something, and then repurposing it for yet another art project.
Which separates it quite a bit from, say, more mashup, sampled culture in a certain way. I mean, you've really. I mean,
I think there probably is actors in some of the shots in Spark of Being, though I can't quite recall what shot those would be. Certainly, in some of the educational films, it's a thin line between what the subjects have been told what to do or set up. But for the most part, they're documentary shots, and so it's a repurposing of that stuff to tell a fictional tale.
I remember hearing about your maybe it's your earlier work or maybe it's still today, but it's quite a painstaking process to create a new film. How long, for instance, did it take you? Say on the sheer days you were working on the construction of Spark of Being to make what we're going to see tonight? Yeah,
I mean, it's tough because all the pieces come in dribs and drabs, so a lot of it's waiting, finding stuff, but then waiting to get the master copy or, waiting to get a new shipment of material in.
Because you'll find it and then need to have an archive send you a copy or something like that.
Yeah, you'll have to get an up-res copy, or, this stuff wasn't grabbed online. So, it's hard to put it in hours like that. And also, there's a fluid nature to this kind of filmmaking, and that is that you let to some extent, the footage guide you as well.
Right.
And, there was there was plot points in Frankenstein, but in Frankenstein, the novel, there's a lot of murder, and there's just a lot of violence. And I very quickly understood that if I wanted to show murder or show violence, that I was going to have to go into a B movie, somebody else's depiction of murder, which is, again, crossing that line of what's transformative.
Because educational films and that kind of stock footage wasn't dealing with violence.
And I wasn't getting snuff films.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So I think we do see an actual corpse that's taken from some army. They're dragging a corpse off in one shot. But okay, so there's no murder now or no visible murder or mayhem really in Frankenstein. Well, then what is it? And so I talked to Dave about that, and he said, well, what it is it's a story about alienation, and it's enough to show that there's something that the monster can't participate in. He can't have love, in a certain way, and that's enough, and that's the point, So. We made sort of a G-rated Frankenstein in that way, but also and again, that was where the footage was giving us.
I see.
It would have been in some ways we would have been making the same mistakes or I don't know if it would be making the same mistakes, but we would have been making the same kind of Frankenstein that people have been making for years. That
right.
It was, it was a horror film,
right.
And
which most people in our culture have all seen numerous times.
Well, of course, the real association with Frankenstein is James Young,
right.
or James Whale, and the bolts and, the green and the whole
6'8" or whatever, stomping around.
And of course the character in Shelley is this incredibly articulate, sensitive, kind of like Renaissance man, the master of languages, and maybe a much more terrifying person, than this beast,
Right.
So it's funny that. In popular culture, that monster is an imbecile, and that's sort of like this thing that's maybe not so scary.
Right.
So
more pitiful almost, or something.
Yeah. Certainly in Young Frankenstein. Right?
Yeah. Right. But you did choose to sort of carry the story along, to use some text in stills as touch points. And how important was it that an audience follow a story?
Well, I mean, I guess we talked about using the Frankenstein story as a skeleton, and then hanging this music and these images off of it, and then in a certain way removing it. There weren't any passages from the text. Only the title is a quote from the text. And so that the title cards maybe advance a story in people's minds, but for the most part, it becomes quite abstract, and I think there's a setup of I'm going to be told a story, but at some point the filmmaker or the creator has lost control,
right.
and now the material is sort of running rampant on its own, and to a degree that we start out sort of in a 19th century or early 20th century setting, and then by the time we're in the sixth piece, there's basketballs flying around,
right.
and modern day kitchens and stuff like that. So we had some fun doing that.
Was part of the bringing it to more contemporary imagery or film excerpts to comment on the questions back on those first questions you guys were confronting around technology and its impact on our lives, or it's the cautionary questions that exist around technology today.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that we're all products of these images in a certain way, as much as they are products of ours.
You and Dave, it sounds from talking with him yesterday and from talking to you guys over the last year and a half or so, there seemed to be quite a robust give and take. That it was really kind of co-created. It wasn't you were off making the film and he was making some music and they came together, or you made the film and then he scored it, or things. Was that part of the?
There certainly was some of that. I mean, in the end of the day, he had to make the music and I had to make the film. But much more than any other collaborator I've had, Dave was really interested in how this story was going to go down, and what it meant and what were we saying, and that was really refreshing. And it took I realized quite early on that this was the type of project that it was, because I have been on most projects where the composer's like, well, see ya at Tech, you do a good job and I'll do a good job, and we've had good results that way too. Dave felt invested in it, and rightfully so. I mean, this was began as his gig. Jenny Billfield called Dave and said, you can do whatever you want, but I want you to do something that you could only do here. And so he called me up, and so in a way he wanted to make sure it was shepherded through. And he was part of that process.
I asked Dave yesterday, and I intended to ask you both at this simultaneously, but both what were, with this process and the making of Spark of Being, the biggest surprises or pleasures, the most joy you got from it, and what was the biggest challenges or difficulty?
There was there was a moment when we were at Stanford where I finally had all my shots in, you know, and we were just, we had both had our laptops, and we were matching like the music with the clips, and it was just like painting, you know. It was just like we felt like it was a very great collaborative experience because we really felt like we were building the piece in real time almost. You know, like this will go here, this will go here, this will go here, and that was really fun. Like I haven't had that with a composer that way, you know, before. So that was really cool. What were the difficulties? Well, you know, there's always difficulties in making a film, you know. It was great having Stanford support, so, you know, but we had to fly out to, it was just like two New Yorkers who had to fly out to California every month or so. So because
that was part of the deal.
That was part of the deal. So that you know, disrupted my schedule.
Yeah, so. Right. I was curious about your work as a filmmaker who also has a life in the theater. You've done for many years. You've worked with Ridge Theater. Your work has been seen here with Michael Gordon. The beautiful film you did, Light is Calling, and last year you helped with a project and added some wonderful imagery around Eric Friedlander's Black Ice and Propane. Because you've done so much work in live theatrical settings, has that had an impact on the way you make films or the way you think about filmmaking?
I certainly think about it differently when I'm thinking about an audience in a cinema as opposed to an audience in a theater.
Oh, really?
And what you know, what I'm making. You know, with certainly, like I've done now 3 or 4 symphonies with Michael. Michael Gordon.
You did the L.A.
Dystopia. We did. Gotham with the American Composers Orchestra, and a shorter one, Who by Water, and of course Decasia, but most people know Decasia because that's what got made into a film where that was the soundtrack and it got sent around, and you know, of course I made Decasia with the idea that it was going to be a theatrical piece, and it wasn't until, you know, some people said, you know, you should really finish this as a film, you know, and you should do it now, you know, and so that we recorded the symphony performing in 5/1, and you know, made the necessary steps. A lot of times, you know, you don't get the rights to record a symphony, you know, you know. In the same way, you only have the rights to show the film in a certain setting, or as opposed to making it, you know, it's a whole new financial level to say, now we're going to, you know, clear it as a film. So there's some things that just practically it doesn't make sense to go out and say, well, this is going to be a film that gets boxed up and shipped around, you know. So there are those practical concerns. But I think, you know, the major thing is that, you know, you don't want a lot of cuts, you know, in a theatrical setting. You don't want to have to be trying to keep up with the band in a certain way. You don't, and you don't want to be distracting from them. So it's, or I say the band.
When you say cuts, you literally mean edits.
Edits, I mean,
you don't want it to be a music video.
I certainly don't want it to be a music video. And I mean, there's people who are just masters of music videos. I'm not one of them.
Right.
So, but the what you end up doing is a set piece, and the shots tend to build over time, you know, and that there is a protagonist, whether it's a stage performer, a musician, or an actor, or you know, singer, and they're going to be drawing a certain amount of the energy, and you're supporting them, and but by virtue of people being there with the intention of listening to music and watching a performer. You're also kind of blindsiding the audience because they weren't expecting maybe the film to be as big a part
Such
of it is. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the funny thing about you know, like when we showed Decasia in a movie theater, people always comment that, you know, the music was a huge part of this. What I thought was going to be a cinematic experience, it was also like a music experience. And when we play it live, somebody goes, "Wow, I thought I was going to hear a symphony perform, and I ended up going to a movie." You know, so you sort of that thing, the narrative role is sort of fulfilled by what you didn't come to hear and see.
Right. Well, it's why Walker's a perfect spot for it, given that we have such a history in our film department and in our, performance
great cross-disciplinary
program. You know, I was curious if, in your talking about the history of Decasia, do you see Spark of Being having a life as a film with a set score?
I do. I mean, and I made it more that way, though it is a spacey film. You know, and there's huge long passages where, you know, it creates a different head than your standard cinematic experience, but I do see it having a life, and I'm actively sending it out to film festivals in a way that I haven't done with a bunch of films recently.
So you've got a set cut version already with Dave's soundtrack, essentially. That's the soundtrack disc on his 3
Absolutely,
release.
and that's what we'll hear tonight.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
You know, I'm playing that.
And tonight you guys are experimenting a little bit with a short set of music within the presentation.
Well, Dave just mentioned that to me. I guess what he wants to do is actually play a little bit before, and then we'll
do the film straight through.
Oh, okay. I think sounds like a good solution.
Great.
You know, that he came up with that on his own, and I think, you know, he just has to think in musical terms what builds a great set, and he's got a lot of experience of that.
Yeah. I was curious about, you know, as a filmmaker, where you see the art form of film, whether it be experimental or more traditional filmmaking, going. I ask because there's a lot of discussion here at the Walker about now that people can watch films on their phones, and there's not, you know, or stream them at home, or there's so many other platforms, that the need for people to come together in a large space and watch a film in a movie house or a cinema space isn't as necessary. But I'm hearing, we're seeing filmmakers start to do what you've been doing for a number of years, which is also to have a theatrical framework for their work to justify almost the live gathering of people. We have Sam Green is bringing his piece Utopia in 4 Movements here, you know, and he said straight out, the reason I'm narrating this live and have the Quavers doing music live is because filmmakers are missing this sense of people need to gather together to have an experience. How do you feel about those issues, or where do you think film as a collective audience, a collective of an audience coming together to watch it together, you know, where the future is going for film?
I mean, do you know if there's a decline in people attending cinemas?
Well, it may be more perceived or a sort of anticipated.
It's certainly people are watching a lot of stuff now.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
And that there's, it seems like much more renewed energy in just like looking at clips. You know,
right.
Like with YouTube, that's part of the, you know, your daily parlance is like sending clips, and you know that's becoming a way of community, which I think is incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
That now there's this context where it's becoming, I guess maybe through email and through how we're in phones, and that we're increasingly talking to each other digitally, and that filmmaking is part of that mix now. I think is it's elevating really the art. I don't think it's detracting from it. But to get back to your point, I mean, there's first of all, there's always going to be dates, you know, and people need things to go to, and movies you don't have to talk during them, but you can also, you know, hold hands or whatever, you know. So there is
people will want to get out of the house occasionally.
People will want. There's air conditioning, and you know, heat, you know, it's dark. I don't know if there's more film festivals than ever. You know, every town has one. So I don't know if it's true that people are stopping going to the movies. It could be, you know, it's something I'm just not aware of. But boy, it sounds like a great gig, Sam Green and the Quavers. You know, so I would go see that. You know, so and I guess there's this whole, you know, I guess when 3D started having its latest renaissance, there was the whole talk. Well, if we make it 3D, then people will come and they won't be able to copy it. You know, that it won't be something that can enter that you know, the daily clip free giveaway. You know, you know, so maybe there's something to that. You know, that on the big shaker and mover. But I think there's something really exciting about the live element, in that you know, after all, well, especially with when we used to have mechanical film projection.
Right.
That was a performance. That was a film passing over a lamp, and
which we still have right back
yeah,
here.
I'm sure you do. And each one of those frames is a moment that we are experiencing in real time.
Right.
And so that the audience becomes a very crucial, the end terminal of that whole thing.
Right.
As it bounces back into the retina, and
Yeah.
it completes its journey. Or rattles around your brain, becomes something else. But so I think that the idea of collecting in a place and watching a film, in a theater is still hard, whether it's still mechanically going over a shutter or whatever.
Right.
There is a performance, there is a moment, the showtime, the moment's now, and this is it, and we're together to do this. That I think still speaks to cinema.
And you're recognizing that it's an exciting time with the amount of visual material that people have access to. Do you feel that we're living in a moment where the sense of fluency around visual material that the culture at large has really changed and has been enhanced, and that just in general that we live in a kind of culture now that has greater acceptance for, say, more abstract or experimental visual imagery?
Yeah, I mean, more acceptance, more sophistication, more patience. That's something that isn't like baldly trying to persuade you or tell you what it means. Is still worthy of watching, and and that there's a value placed on these things. That an effective thing or a beautiful thing is worth sharing with your friends, for instance, or putting on Facebook or whatever, as part of something. Hey, check this out, and that people do that because they're at their computers anyway. And so it's really, I'm encouraged by it, to tell you the truth. I think that that there's a much greater acceptance of film and visual material, and not dumb ads.
Right. Even the ads are getting
more
better. Well, Bill, is there any last things about Spark of Being that this art conversation will live down in our archives and history and online, and that you'd like to say that we haven't touched on about the making of this piece or your work in general? Well,
I mean, we've talked a lot about what Dave brought, and one thing is just watching him, which was really edifying, was just he's a great band leader, and he really knew what he wanted, and he could talk to these guys in a very quick and efficient way to marshal that, and that was really cool to be around.
How did that come into play with regard to, like, if you guys were working out an idea or he saw what you had put together, would he have a certain sound in his head and just go to his band and say, let's see if we can get this, and he'd be able to communicate that quickly?
I think ideally that's what we wanted. That only got to happen with a few clips because he had to record so much of the music before he'd seen everything. But he certainly responded to the early stuff, and we knew where that was going, and he suggested to Olive, sounds that came off of that. And then just as also getting people together, like Olive is incredibly gifted, curator of sounds.
DJ Olive.
And now Jeff Countryman was just playing for me his soundtrack, what he's remixing of Olive stuff and bringing in new sounds. And the band wasn't here, so I was seeing the film sort of in a new way this afternoon with just the track, just the backing track and the sounds.
That's great.
And it was, I don't know, it was a whole new experience for me. It was like seeing the film, and so it gave me an idea of, well, maybe we can have a version where you just hear the track, and then a version with, so that was cool, and Dave put that together. These were and what Adam brought to the with these remixes. So it's been like the whole band together has really created the music for that. So that was really cool.
And next week or the week after, you bring it to New York in a very different setting in the Highline Ballroom, which is is it a standing room?
Well, this is what I'm just understanding today. Actually, Jeff told me that it's more like a Fillmore setup, where
right.
Which I hadn't really occurred to me because I've never been there. So I do wonder if we're going to be able to bring in seats or what the deal is. But because standing gets tiring.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
That's their problem.
But you might find. I mean, we've done some projects where in club settings where there is a strong visual component, and it's surprising people can really get riveted and be with it. Even
no, I think it'll be fun. It'll be probably people will have beers in their hands.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Whatever, so
right.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, Bill, great to have you here, and thanks so much. We look forward
thanks so
to
much,
tonight.
Philip. Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah, great.